The city of Butte, Montana is a town that is known for its unique character. For years this was the mining city, the richest hill on earth. Underneath this ground there was gold, and there was silver, and there was copper. Word spread across the nation and even to Europe. There was plenty of work for those who would make the long journey to Butte City, Montana. They came to Butte from all over Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, and the Baltics. They were Irish, Italian, English, Yugoslavian. Some came from Mexico and South America. And at one time, Butte had one of the largest Asian populations in the Northwest. There were over 100,000 people living and working on the Butte Hill. They had come to mine the rich ore for the company, for themselves and all of our good God.
The finest of entertainment, one of the it is the richest hill on earth, not because of all of the vast deposits of ore up there, but because of the quality type of people we have. They are very special people.
After decades of mining, in fact almost a century to the date, the good life of Butte seemed to be coming to a fast halt. Copper, the lifeblood of the economy, was now being produced in South America, far less than what it cost to mine in Butte. The Anaconda Company had sold its interests in the mines and the huge open pit operation to the Atlantic Richfield Corporation. It didn't take long for ARCO to assess the profit and loss statement.
Medical problems, and I was coming back and I called my office, and my secretary told me that the Anaconda Company called, and there was going to be a press conference in the afternoon and wanted to know if I could be there. And I said, what's it all about? And she said, the street talk is that they're going to pull a pin. Well, and it was like somebody had thrown a pot of scalding water right in my face. I couldn't believe I was stunned. But I guess, you really look at it. The handwriting had been on the wall for some time that something was going to happen. I do remember very vividly, driving very fast from the Coeur d'Alenes into Butte that day to get the Anaconda Company office by 4 o'clock. When I got there, Frank Gardner pulled me aside and told me what the announcement was going to be, and said he'd been trying to get hold of me earlier than the day. But it was almost like a death in the family, that all of a sudden that you realize that your neighbors were going to be out of work, and that for some people, it could have possibly been the last opportunity for them to be gainfully employed. And it was a terrible day. I can't remember a day in my tenure as chief executive that I felt as bad as I did that day, and really almost helpless to think that all of a sudden you were going to lose over 1,000 jobs in the community, and what the impact was going to be. That's the memory is ingrained in my mind, and it will never leave. I think of all the things, the dark days of my life, and then obviously during my administration, that had to be the single most dreadful day that I can remember. I just can't really tell you how badly I felt about it, and how worried I was what was going to happen to the community.
Butte had lost its paycheck. This little metropolis, this melting pot, was on its way to oblivion. Phrases like ghost town and washed up surfaced, and for a while it seemed as if the unique spirit that had held the community together was eroding. With thoughts of foreclosure and daily job loss estimates looming in the headlines, Bubble Bill was quietly celebrating the recovery of his wife Joyce from a devastating illness. In thanksgiving for his wife's recovery, Bill had vowed to build a small Madonna in a public place so that others might call upon a higher power in a time of need.
I'd always had a great respect for the lady, and I'd asked her to help me to pray to God, or if she made her well, I would build a statue. And so that's how it got started.
Bill told fellow workers and friends about his plan, and they in turn recalled their own recollections of divine intervention. And the idea of a 3-foot statue mushroomed into a 90-foot tall tribute to everyone who was Our Lady of the Rockies. She had a humble beginning. Early in 1980, working quietly but with an almost eerie sense of confidence, a small committee was organized.
So he came to me later and he said that he had mentioned his statue to the men all over the pit, and they all became interested. They kept coming to him and asking him if they could help him. So he said, I have all these workers, and he said, I have nowhere to work, nothing. No, he said, I don't know where to go now. So I said, Bob, do you know Joe Roberts? I said, you call Joe and you tell him that Annie Nettles said to call you. And you ask him if he could give you any help with building your lady. And he came back to me so enthusiastic because Joe was so enthusiastic and so kind. Well, from then on, it took off.
We sat at this same table when we started this deal in 1979. And once, nobody knew where to start. I said, well, we're going to have money. So I threw $1,000 into the pot. Kopervika threw $1,000 in. And at that point, we started, and from then on, the more letters that were derogatory towards us, and the more slandering that we got, and the more people laughing at us, the more we decided we were going to build it. And so we did.
The site chosen where the monument was to be built was Saddle Rock, a prominent landmark on the east ridge of the Continental Divide. The most
my father, who has since passed away, and a brother who's a distant Spokane, and I were involved in a company that in fact owned Saddle Rock, and took less than a day. It took 2 phone calls. To phone call to my brother, of course, a 15-minute conversation with my father, and it was handsome.
One of the unheralded challenges of this project would be the building of a road to the site where the lady would stand. The Anaconda Company had donated some heavy earth-moving equipment, but the work was strenuous on the men and the aging equipment.
So you had to be careful, or it'd break down. You couldn't really run it that long. And then we were doing, with no blasting equipment when we first started. You'd end up doing a lot of work with the equipment you weren't supposed to do with it. Just working it a little bit too hard. Like big boulders and that, we never had the blasting equipment. So you'd either end up going over the top of them or around them. So it was tough to actually stay right exactly where you planned.
At one point during the road construction, the original pool of $2,000 had dwindled down to just $14 and some change. The equipment was falling apart, and for just a while, it seems as if this dream was turning into a nightmare. Somehow, some way, the road was completed in 1981. At the same time, different plans for the statue itself began to materialize.
We even had a nut I hired personally to come over here when we were trying to estimate the size of the statue we were going to build. And we got him up on top, and he climbed on the rocks with us. And boy, he said, we should build one up here 1,200 feet high. And I said, well, Marvin, when are you leaving? I knew right then that I'd spent $5,000 for an engineer that wasn't worth even talking to.
After many frustrating design changes, Joe Roberts brought the idea to one of his welders at the heavy equipment shop, Leroy Lee, who would now find himself in the role of fabricator and artist.
He said to me, he says, can you build a statue from this? And I asked where the Prince of Grid was, and he said, well, there isn't. And I said, well, can you build a 90-foot statue of me? And he said, no. And I said, well, no, I never sculptured that before. I would even know where to start. Well, then about a week later, Bob brought this little statue that was about 2 inches high. And he brought it in the welding shop, and the hands were out. And he left it there. And I kept looking at it. I said to Joe, I said, this should be the Lady of the Rockies. And he said, well, we thought about it with the hands out, but we figured that the wind pressure would be too great. And I said, well, if we put screen in it, and the way it's formed, the wind would pass through it. And he said, well, we get the design and sculpture it. And I said, I'll do it. And for the life of me, I can't believe I said it, because when I first heard about it, I thought, how could anybody build a statue 90 feet out of iron? So I told him I'd build a hand first. Well, I built the hand, and then I went into the face. And for 3 days, I worked on that face, and I was at a loss. I just couldn't figure out. I went home and I said to my wife, I said, I'm no sculptor and I don't know what I'm doing. So I told her, I said, I'm going to have to tell Joe Monday he's going to have to find somebody else.
But the answer came, and Lee, aided by volunteers, worked in the Robert welding shop for nearly 5 years, meticulously molding a tribute to motherhood from raw steel.
I really had never used a wire feed welder. And so Leroy says, well, here's the welder. He says, this is how it works, and just go start welding. And I took the welder, and I was making all kinds of just messes, just all kinds of messes. And I thought, boy, this isn't for me. I'm just, it's not working. So anyway, I had a little section that was way up high in the air. And so I built myself a little scaffold, got up there. And I couldn't reach that one little area. So what I did is I threw on my hood and stood on my tiptoes and reached as high up as I could. And struck the welder. And it sounded decent. I couldn't see it. So anyway, it sounded decent. I did that little section, and pretty soon I looked up and I said, wait a second, it's working. What happened? What did I do? So basically what I'm trying to say is that I was in on this project, and my body was there. But actually, it was not me being. I was a part of it. That's all I was. I was there to when Our Lady needed me, and she was actually the one that did the job. I didn't do it.
In early autumn 1985, the actual site where the lady would stand was made ready by blasting huge boulders into pebbles. Al Beavis had worked as a blasting superintendent at the Burley Pit, but this type of explosive work demanded artistic ability as well as hard rock determination.
It was a challenge for me at that time, then, because I was an underground miner prior to going to work in the pit, and I had a lot of background in drilling and blasting. And to look up to that mountain and figure to literally take a section of that out to place a statue up there was more or less it was a goal. It became a goal then.
The geological formations that appeared after the surface rock had been blown away are known, ironically perhaps, as cathedral rock. Now, with the statue completed in huge sections and the site prepared, the question of how the lady would get to the top of the mountain had to be answered. It was first thought that the statue could be transported by huge trucks, but the newly built road would not accommodate long, wide loads, and the fabricators couldn't bear the thought of torching the lady into smaller sections. The decision came. They would fly her up with a helicopter. The only aircraft capable of handling the load would be the Sikorsky CH-54A or Sky Crane. The official military designation of the CH-54A is Tarhi, so named to honor a peace-loving tribe of Native Americans. Tarhi translates as crane in English. It is a fitting way to describe this gangly bird with her slender body and long legs. A Sky Crane can lift 10 tons absolute sea level, but the aircraft would be flown well beyond specified limits, hoisting sections of the statue weighing nearly 10 tons in thin, unstable alpine air, nearly 9,000 feet above sea level. In fact, this mission would be a test have been endured to mission memory.
Well, this was the time that we've been on now. I've been 18 years in
position. This is right on the limits of our abilities as far as controllability. If the winds will wait just a little, it has good training potential because we're at the limits of the aircraft and our limits. And of course, as we stretch those limits, we learn from.
Tuesday, December 17th, 1985, arrived like most winter days in the mountains. Fog shrouded the top of the mountain where the lady would be placed. Tar heat thundered up side of the Continental Divide. Some describe the chopper and its payload as looking like some sort of giant dragonfly toting a huge cookie cutter. The first piece was set in place on the ground, then lifted onto the base with a conventional crane. That afternoon, the morning shroud of chilling fog lifted, and the men on the mountain asked for another section. This piece heavier at 15,000 pounds. With low dropped behind the and approached slowly, maneuvering for the perfect angle, waiting for the exact right winds. The tar heat returned to base as the ground workers labored in the frigid December afternoon to attach the second section. Tired and cold, well after the sun had set, the ground workers made their way down the mountain to their waiting families. The day's work was complete. They would sleep well that night. As Wednesday, December 18th dawned, the little town in the Summit Valley was literally buzzing with anticipation. Yesterday's work had been a good lesson for the men on the ground as well as the flight crew. Flight crews and iron workers were speaking the same language now. Conditions were nearly perfect. There was no fog. The midwinter sun cast a brilliant light against the snow on the mountain and in the valley below. The morning saw the biggest section so far, 17,000 pounds, fly up the mountain. In the afternoon, the heaviest lift of the project, a massive 19,000-pound section, went up. The updrafts on the top of the mountain, seemingly frightening, would actually be a tool for the tar heat, lifting the giant helicopter and its load like some giant ethereal helping hand. The men on the mountain and the waiting city below witnessed a magnificent big sky sunset as the mission for Day 2 was accomplished. The city below held its collective breath. She was halfway there. On Day 3, confidence among the workers on the mountain and the flight crew was running high. Captain Comstock and the crew had received personal congratulations from President and Mrs. Reagan. Radio and television stations were interrupted. Was to be brought up to the mountain. But on this day there was an almost eerie sense of quiet in the air. The updrafts on the mountain that had assisted the last tips were calm now. What had become routine was about to become near tragedy. For the men on the ground, the flight crew of the tar heat, and the project itself. This load was aerodynamically unstable from liftoff. At the crucial point when tons of metal and aircraft hovered over the waiting section of the monument, the 100-mile-per-hour downwash from the giant rotor started a chain reaction. The angle of the hands of the statue against the downward blast started to spin the section of the statue like a giant child's pinwheel. Instinctively, the waiting iron workers let go of the taglines as 8 tons of metal spun violently out of control just a few feet above their heads. At one point, one of the hands did tip the side structure and then collided with the outer wall of the statue, sending a thundering metal-on-metal shudder throughout the monument. People on the ground were horrified as they witnessed the event through telescopes and binoculars. But the flight crews steadied the ship and set the load down to return to the airport to regain their nerves.
It seemed like a very dangerous, very scary situation.
It was. But we're used to working like that.
What went through your mind when it started spinning?
Trying to get a hold of it so we could try to get it into place. The hooter here and I almost had our point, but they didn't get the other points.
In the last many moments of daylight, the Tarhe's flight crew made another attempt up the side of the mountain with the hand section. This time, success. The only damage would be to some of the delicate fingers. There was collective sigh of relief and whispers of prayer as the men of Tarhe and the iron workers on the mountain watched the winter sun set.
There comes a moment and now it's time to reach out where no man has gone. And break through the barriers, blaze a trail. Time to reach out above and beyond.
Now all the less was at peace. Keeping an old unworking precision, the American flag and a Christmas tree were attached to the last piece. Majestically, the headpiece flew over the summit valley to the top of the mountain. All the way she faced west, and looked below to Little Town, to the people who had all shared this dream. The final section was gently set atop the rest of the monument. Butte literally stood still. The years of planning and hard work were over. She was here at last.
I knew it, but I just know better. I can't hardly. But you see all of these guys, you know, and gals too. For 5 years, they've done everything. I can't tell you how.
What does it tell you about the people of Butte?
That's what I knew. They're the greatest in the world. They've got hearts that you can't believe, and they love very, very deeply.
My boy asked me one night when we come down, he says, "What do you get paid, Dad?" I said, "Night the lights are turned on." Tonight paid it, Dad.
These women have not tried to get my record. They put up a lot from us. We weren't home. We were up here on the mountain working, and they were to be given a lot of credit. And this is devoted to them. And we're just elated. I don't know what to tell you. It's beautiful. We love it. And Star Lady, it belongs to everybody, and especially Butte and surrounding communities. They're the ones that did it. I didn't do it. They did it.
You know, Butte was a sad city. It seemed as if everything had stopped. And really, it seemed as if we didn't have any industry that was doing very well. And all of a sudden, when the lady was put up there, everything started to take a hold again. And since then, Butte has made a marvelous recovery.
Today, a historic old church on the Butte Hill serves as a visitor center for Our Lady of the Rockies. In the summer months, buses bring tourists to the statue. The view from the top of the Continental Divide makes for some spectacular photography, and the experience of being so close to the statue is uplifting.
The only day when we were constructing the fence out here, after the statue was up, the tours were being brought up, and there was a lady moving back, and I was out there working on the fence out in front. All we had at that time was the poking up, and we were working around there, and she kept backing up, and I said, "Well, where are you going?" And she said, "I got to go a little back a little farther so I get a better picture of her." I told her, I said, "You take one more step, you're going to shake hands with her."
The thing about the project that inspired me wasn't the religious connotation of it, but more spiritual, what it embodied,
Bless us, Our Lady of the Rockies, and this land, those peace divine. May our hearts be like your arms, full of love and open wide. Give us strength in times of trouble. Give us faith in times of fear. When the dark is all around us, light our way and hold us near. Bless us, Our Lady of the Rockies, and this land most peace divine. May our hearts be like your arms, full of love and open wide. Like a river ever flowing, each of us is born to share the joy